Welcome to the I T'd Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 46. What can Jenga teach us about vendor lock-in? So Jenga, a game that consists of rectangular blocks, drunk people, children, the perpetually bored. They all enjoy playing this game. Enjoy might be a strong word. Jenga is a stacking game in which you have three blocks per level. Blocks are stacked with every level being perpendicular to the previous level, so that you can pull bricks out and stack them on top of the tower. And the whole purpose of the game is to stack the tower as high as you can, and it sucks. It's not a fun game. It's a game. It can be fun, but alcohol kind of helps, or being less than 12, being younger than 12, makes it fun. Which, if you think about it, might be the exact same fucking thing. But vendor lock-in. What is vendor lock-in? Vendor lock-in is a concept where you are perpetually stuck with a particular vendor because of all of the tools, or maybe not even all of the tools, but a particular tool that you have to use because of reasons. And it is something to avoid, and it can be very difficult to identify when you are experiencing vendor lock-in until it's too late. And so what I'm trying to do here with telling you about vendor lock-in is I'm going to try to convince you to avoid it. Vendor lock-in is a problem. It can really drastically affect your environment and make things just exceptionally difficult for you, the IT manager, the business owner, in the long run. And understanding vendor lock-in and understanding how it happens, you can hopefully avoid these pitfalls. So for a lot of reasons, a lot of companies will have vendor lock-in because there's the biggest reason is because there's no alternative. So a really good example of there's no good alternative for vendor lock-in scenario is Microsoft 365. It's really the only game in town for collaboration with Microsoft Office tools that gets you email and all of the other stuff, online sharing, and gives you a centralized way to manage it. Now, I know Google's probably thrown up its arms and going, well, what about Workspace? And I have to say, well, fuck Workspace. It's not an enterprise level product. It is definitely something that schools can use. But if you want an enterprise grade collaboration solution all in one, Office 365 is really the only game in town. Adobe probably thinks it's got a solution, and Amazon tried but failed. But really the only game in town, and everybody is locked into Office 365. Meaning when Microsoft pisses you off, you don't really have any regress. You can't tell them, I'm going to go to your competitor. They have no real good reason to help themselves do that. So not having a good alternative is the first way vendor lock-in happens. Another reason that vendor lock-in happens is price scenarios. So a lot of organizations, a lot of solutions will price themselves so that you sign a multi-year agreement. In the IT world, typically the way that contracts kind of scale is that you can go month to month, you can go yearly, and then you can go 3 years. And I assume there are probably contracts which you can sign more, but nobody really wants to be in that same contract, or nobody wants to be in that kind of scenario. So anyway, signing on for a 3-year contract can lock you into a vendor for that period of time. And that can be a real hazard, because what if they suck after the first year? Like, what if this vendor decides they're gonna stop having this particular function that you needed? Or what if they change how they bill? Or what if they all of a sudden, their prices drop and you're stuck at paying the higher bill price? These are all actual things that happen. But vendor lock-in can occur because you've signed a contract that is unfair. And so that's another example. You have vendor lock-in because you signed a price agreement at a specific rate, or your contract requires you to stay with them. So yeah, another way that vendor lock-in happens is you have parts of their solution already, and it integrates automatically with another piece. And so a good example for this, again, is going to be Microsoft 365. So, you use their Microsoft operating system for your Windows computer, and you use Microsoft 365 for your collaboration and email and all of that. So why not use Microsoft Defender for your antivirus, your EDR solution, to protect your systems? It integrates with everything. You already get all of the alerting, and you already have everything kind of set up in that cloud. So why not use that one solution? And so ease of access, ease of integration, all of that are reasons why you can get locked into a vendor. Other aspects for vendor lock-in are things like legacy equipment or legacy solutions, compatibility with current functionalities, no good feature parity between solutions or between vendors. And so there are a lot of reasons why vendor lock-in can happen. And it is important to understand when and where it can happen and why. Now, what I'm not saying is you need to have a particular vendor for every separate fucking thing in your environment. Microsoft isn't going to go away. You're going to have to use Microsoft in an enterprise environment, because if you use a Mac, the concept of IT will rise out of the ether and stab you. That's just how that works. No, don't use Apple in enterprise environments. They're not meant for that. But otherwise, you have specific vendor lock-in for an entire industry, and so you're not going to be able to avoid this entirely. Previous to probably 10 years ago, I would have told you that Cisco is the only switch game in town. Like, if you want switches, Cisco's it. Like, you're not going to find a good alternative. But now there are plenty of alternatives, specifically based on your enterprise grade or what you're trying to do. You can find an alternative that is much cheaper than Cisco. Cisco has very expensive products. And so there are multiple other solutions. FS, Unify, Meraki's owned by Cisco. That doesn't work. But there are alternatives to enterprise grade switching gear. So you don't necessarily have to have vendor lock-in, and you do have a choice. So what can you do to avoid vendor lock-in? Well, one, it's be aware of your current stack, your current solutions, and understand what your environment looks like in totality of vendors and number of vendors. That's kind of key. The other thing is put yourself into a place where you're not going to rely entirely on a specific vendor. In the MSP world, we have one particular vendor who insists on forcing everybody into 3-year agreements. Now, they're like, well, you don't have to sign the 3-year agreement, but your price goes up by 600%. And they try to be very nice about it. And I'm not going to say their name because I don't want to get sued by them, but they fucking suck. They like to buy products and be very excited about this new product, but then they basically drain that product's talent pool of actual viable people. They do everything they can to drive out the innovators to the product, and then they basically just dump the product as into a pit of other solutions that are kind of half made or half viable. But God damn it, if it isn't the cheapest game in town. Being aware of your vendor and how they interoperate and who you have signed up for everything can help you avoid a vendor lock-in solution. And understanding that how pieces fit together can also help as well. One of the things that you can do to avoid vendor lock-in is understanding that you don't necessarily have to have these integrations to make your shit work. One of the problems that we face in IT specifically is that a lot of vendors that have solutions, they like to make it seem like if you don't buy their other solutions, there's no other way that you're going to be able to accomplish this specific task. And that's not true. And in fact, when I build my products out, like a sim that we have, the sim that I've developed from scratch, I've made it so that your solution, it doesn't matter what your solution is. If you want to integrate it into the sim, we can do that. If you can get logs repeatedly, predictably, and they are in a text format, I can ingest them into my sim. And it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter what your solution is, as long as those three things are true, the logs are constant, predictable, and repeatable. I can create a system to get those logs into the sim. And you have to understand that other solutions, doesn't matter how they are built, they are typically built that way as well. They are, even if they say they aren't, they are. Now, you might be limited as to what functionalities you can do with specific things, but you can at least get them integrated to an extent to get your job done, and you're going to be able to survive. No solution that I've ever seen limits its integrations based on whether you're in or out of their ecosystem entirely, except for maybe Apple. But aside from that, when you're looking at your vendors, you have to make sure that, like in Jenga, you're not getting yourself to a point where you're resting everything on this single brick at the bottom of the tower. Because if you have this single brick at the bottom of the tower, the rest of the tower becomes unstable and is very easy to make fall. And it can hurt you entirely, because, for instance, if you are relying on a single solution, and then if that single solution should have an issue, you're now completely shut down. You're not able to do anything, which is why, when Office 365 goes down, when Microsoft goes down, it can be disastrous if everything you have resides in Office 365. And Microsoft has had no shortage of outages just in this year. They don't last very long and they're not perpetual, but there have been hours and even days where access has been limited. So, being entirely in there can kind of feel like you've got a single brick on the bottom of your tower where it's very wobbly. And your Jenga tower is ready to fall at any point. And when you're in vendor lock-in, when you have vendor lock-in, you have to kind of be very careful to replace those pieces if you've gotten yourself locked in there with multiple pieces. Because when you've locked yourself into vendor lock-in and you finally decide, I'm going to change those pieces, it can make it much more difficult to replace. For reasons like feature parity, you may not have a new solution that has the exact same features, and therefore replacing that specific solution is going to be a little harder for you. You're going to have to go through a few more hoops to continue your workflow. You may have to change your workflow, and that can be a problem. And extend the adoption of the whatever solution you're in. And now, the more pieces you add, the taller you make this tower of vendor lock-in, the harder it will get to balance. Meaning, you're gonna run into a situation where you can have issues actually performing work because this vendor doesn't do this particular thing, and you really, really need to do that. And so you're having to build out 100 different solutions to get to where to what you want. As an example, if you are entirely in Office 365 and you need to provide open access to a file, Microsoft 365 doesn't really have a good solution for that. You can do that through SharePoint and all of that, but that can have some significant complications. So like if you're trying to serve out a large file that requires a lot of access, and you want people to be able to download it at will, SharePoint's not the right solution for you, because Microsoft will tell you it's going to be slower. The more people who access it, will degrade the performance of that download, and so on and so forth. And what they're going to tell you to do is, you need to have an Azure file share that provides open access to that file. And the problem with that is it's expensive, it's complicated, and may be overkill for what you're attempting to do. And so the vendor lock-in there can make it much more difficult to do something that is relatively simple if you have other solutions in play. And so, that's a really good example. Now, one way that companies get themselves into vendor lock-in that I've seen, and one thing to avoid in your organization, is a concept that they of request for price, RFPs. And these are solution-based requests, and a lot of organizations, specifically like nonprofits, are required to do this, where every 3 years they do an RFP. And one of the things that I've seen is that when there's this requirement for this activity, the people who are picking the solutions will basically stick with the vendor because it's much more difficult to go through the RFP process with a completely new vendor. And it's it can be 16, 17, 18 month process to just process an RFP for something that you want, because you have to go through all of these approval boards and shit like that, and it makes it difficult. So your adoption method can kind of fuck you in the fact that you're creating an environment where vendor lock-in seems like a really good deal because I don't have to work to get my vendors set. Another way that people can get themselves into vendor lock-in is by just looking for the cheapest price out there, or by using a third party who insists on only selling this particular solution base. One of the things we've seen is that if you have a vendor who basically gets kickbacks from a particular solution vendor, they may be like, oh yeah, well they can do all this, and sign you up for services upon services that you don't need. And so that creates an environment where you can get vendor lock-in just from having a vendor who doesn't have another solution type or another solution base available to you. So in the end, the thing that I want IT professionals and business owners to come away with from this is that when you are working with vendors and you're attempting to prevent yourself from getting vendor lock-in, just pay attention. Pay attention to what you're doing, pay attention to the price, and you may have to pay a higher price for a solution, but you have to weigh that cost against the benefit of being able to walk away from a particular vendor at any given time. Because like Jenga, you probably just shouldn't play that game. Well, thanks guys. I hope you have a great day.